having me here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this, so please don't hesitate with any questions. Happy to field any questions. I'll need a glass of water, I think, because I've got some chips stuck in my throat. So where's the first question coming from? Okay. Yes.
So this is also from a perspective of being a father. There's been a bit of chat on our group about how do we keep our children interested in going to Mass. This is from infants to toddlers to teenagers. So I know that you've obviously gone through all those stages. Give us some tips, particularly from a dad's perspective as well, that would be nice.
Well, that's a great question and very timely, because I was marking some assignments just earlier this week, and one of the students, these are adult students, quoted some stats about Mass attendance, and there was one telling factor which now I'm going to repeat often. Keeping kids interested in Mass is very difficult, because of the mentalities they have today and the nature of the Mass being the same generally, etc., and they find it repetitious and they find it boring. The best way for kids to grow out of that is to realise exactly what the Mass is and what they're attending. They must be enculturated into understanding that they are not going to get entertainment, but they're going to an event where Jesus is made present. Okay, which Jesus? It's the Jesus that's now in heaven at the right hand of the Father, resurrected and glorified, and who acts as high priest in the heavenly temple, offering what sacrifice? The same sacrifice he offered on Mount Calvary. What evidence do we have for that in Scripture? There's a oblique reference in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 21 to 24, that range, where the author of Hebrews is talking about heaven and describing heaven, and then mentions Christ as the one mediator whose blood speaks greater or better than Abel's blood. So Jesus in heaven, his blood is speaking. He's at the right hand of the Father. His blood is speaking to the Father, which is a term meaning that he's advocating on our behalf. Christ at the right hand of the Father is the one mediator of the new covenant, the final eternal covenant, and he's offering to the Father as priest what he did on Mount Calvary. He kept his wounds. When he rose from the dead, he kept his wounds. They're the wounds he's offering to the Father as priest in heaven. He's not offering a new sacrifice or an additional sacrifice to what he did on Mount Calvary. He's offering the same sacrifice. Now, why this long-winded explanation? All you do, you tell your kids that you're at an event where Jesus is made present. Which Jesus? The Jesus in heaven who is priest. Right? And we have the gift of receiving his body and blood for our spiritual benefit, so we can walk the journey to heaven. And we're receiving Christ's resurrected body as the food for our one day future resurrection. Okay? Let me just finish this point before I take another question. I think this factor is very, very critical, and the stats show it. You're all women, many of you are married, you got husbands. The stat that I came across this week is that where the father does not attend regular Mass, it's only a 17% chance that the rest of the family will go to weekly Mass. So if the father does not attend weekly Mass, it's only 17% chance that the wife and all the children will also attend Mass every week. If the father attends weekly Mass, that statistic rises to over 90%. So what's that saying? Men, if they're derelict in their responsibility and their example, well, they're sending the message to the kids, well, if dad doesn't go, it's not important. He doesn't go, why should I go? If mum goes, that's great. But if mum and dad go, that's how it ought to be. And that what enculturates the kids into believing, hey, this is important to mum and dad, so it's important to the girls and the boys, and they go every week. There's a reason for that. Therefore, I go every week. It must be important. Later on, they'll hopefully grow out of that routine, that sense of obligation, And if they're properly catechized and understanding what the Mass is, what event they're attending, and what food they're receiving, then they can grow into the Mass and want to go themselves for positive reasons. Okay? So that status, so if your husbands are not going to regular Mass, well, they need a bit of a clip over the ears. All right? Now, I don't know if you can do that, but if you can talk to them in a way and explain to them, hey, our family is not the family it should be until you are coming to weekly Mass with me. See, I make it a point now that I will go to the same Mass that my wife and children go on the weekend. Right? Now, they began to go frequently to St. Jerome's and the Vigil Mass on the Saturday. And I've said, okay, well, therefore I'll rearrange my Saturday so I'm at the same Mass with them. I'll also go to Mass on the Sunday and I'll go to Mass on the weekdays, but with the family, I need to show that unity. Sometimes it's not possible for various reasons, okay? But that's the exception, not the norm. Okay, next question. Yeah.
So bearing in mind, like you've gone into great detail about what the kids should be enculturated into kind of understanding about Mass. So you're talking about them being properly catechized. Do you think that dioceses or eparchies are doing enough at that level for children and families to help catechize them, and in terms of resourcing and just general practical help, or
Well, the general answer to that question is that there's a great crisis in catechesis right across the board. And the first problem is in the home. It's not happening where it should be. Parents who leave it up to the school to do are tearing up their own obligation. Now, of course, a lot of families think it's okay, we have to educate our children in the faith. We can't really do it. That's why we're sending our kids to Catholic schools, and that's why we're making the sacrifice to pay the fees to do that. So in their conscience, they're clear up here that we're doing the best we can. Okay. But people like yourselves who are fervent in your faith and know the issues and want to do the right thing and want to be good wives, good parents, etc. You have to teach your children what the faith is, irrespective of what the school is doing. Okay? I find that parents who do go out of their way to actually, instill values, morals, and teach their kids at least the rudiments of the faith can definitely make up for bad schools to a large degree. Okay? Normally those kids who are well formed in the home go to the schools and realise, hey, the school's got a problem here. They're not doing the right thing, either in liturgy, either in camps and retreats, either in the classroom, teaching this, teaching that. So they don't necessarily get infected if they've got very good parents who make it clear that, hey, I'm right, they're wrong, and know that. Now, what schools are doing, I would say that from the late 60s through to the 70s, 80s, the 90s, and probably for the first half of the, of the first decade of the third millennium, catechesis, education in schools, for the most part, was disastrous. We did not transition at all well from those days when, before the council, before the Second Vatican Council, when we had good, faithful religious for the most part, who were doing the teaching, brother X, sister Y, father X, Y, Z, they were in the schools, they were modelling, they were setting the example, they were teaching firmly, clearly, right, and saying this is the faith, and it was not compromised, it was not confused. From that, we transitioned very poorly to different models of RE imparted by lay people who basically knew nothing. And it was ignorance passing on ignorance, and we had what I call the era of beanbag theology, or beanbag catechesis. There are different models of RE, and they all failed. They all failed because what is necessary for a person in the classroom and in the home is that that person is modelling fervour, enthusiasm, piety, fidelity, and knowledge and showing in themselves that religion, the faith, the Catholic faith is number one, and the kids will catch that and they will remember that. All the academic articles that I read in this area, all the stats are telling us that students remember those teachers. They forget the lame, the inept, the anemic, the sterile, the unenthusiastic. You know, they're the ones that are, if they're remembered, it's for the wrong reasons. But the teachers they remember are those who modelled it. For the most part, I think right across the Catholic world, and I'm not afraid to say this, and I know this is going public, for the most part, we're still doing it very badly. In where I work, in the City Catholic Schools office, in the Catholic schools of the Archdiocese of Sydney, things have improved. And I've met many people. I would say that I know of hundreds of good people in our schools. And they're not concentrated in particular schools, but they're spread over many schools. Leaders, whether they're principals, APs, RECs, ordinary RE teachers, who are on side. Or there may be family educators or whatever, they're on side. And they're doing the best they can, and they're doing a good job. There's still many, and I've met many, who are not on side, okay? Who definitely don't want a religious education that's clear, that's firm, that's black and white, that's scripture-based, that talks about tradition, that talks about what the catechism says, that talks about what the official church teaching is. There's still too many of those people in our schools, in positions of power and authority, and in front of kids in the classroom. This problem will not be solved in my lifetime. It can only be solved by generational change. That's why I'm in the business at the moment of identifying where I can young people and inspire them to have a future and aspire to leadership in our schools. Actually, I decided in the last week to call this group the Barnabas Group. Say Barnabas, because Barnabas means son of encouragement. Okay, so these are the people I want to encourage, that I want to identify, tell them that they can aspire to leadership despite their own doubts, and over the next 20, 30 years, rise up the ladder of leadership. That's the only real way that we can change things over time. And again, I won't be there to see it, because it's going to take 20 to 30 years. Okay, what's next? Yes. Yes.
Just on that note, do you think that within our Catholic school system, we shy away too much from just speaking it really black and white, like talking about the basics of whether there is a hell, whether there is purgatory, whether certain people will have to face?
Yeah, to give you the answer straight away, we've failed in that area for the last 50 years at least. Absolutely. We need today, it's still a big problem. We need to just say it as it is and not to be afraid of it. Yes, we need to talk about heaven, we need to talk about hell, we need to talk about purgatory, we need to talk about sin, we need to talk about original sin, venial sin, mortal sin, we need to talk about doing good and avoiding evil, we need to talk about faith, hope and love, we need to talk about the 10 Commandments, we need to talk about God and the devil, we need to talk about spiritual warfare, we need to talk about, I might have said this already, obeying the 10 Commandments, purity, fidelity, chastity, these things. We generally don't, okay? And we're paying the consequence of that. I remember once, this would have been about 2013, I gave a presentation, it was in one of the regional offices, and I mentioned purgatory. And a very senior person, a good woman, who's got a lot of the basics there, she said, but I thought the church abolished purgatory. I said, no, it did not. It has no authority nor any power to abolish purgatory. What she misunderstood was what Pope Benedict had ruled in 2006 about the fate of unborn or unbaptized infants who die without baptism. Where do they go? And the general teaching was that they go to what's called the limbo of the infants. And Benedict said, well, we don't know that for sure, we don't have enough data, and we shouldn't put limits on the mercy of God. So he wasn't abolishing anything, he was just making it clear that in this area we don't have enough information, and maybe in God's plan in his merciful and loving plan that those infants who have died without baptism can be offered an opportunity for ultimate salvation. But purgatory, people are afraid of purgatory. What for? Why are we afraid of teaching our kids about purgatory? Maybe the name is a bit hard and it's a little bit scary in itself, but purgatory really is God's beauty parlour. It's where you go if you need to be purified. Firstly, forgiven for venial sin that you haven't repented of. Secondly, to do any outstanding penance for sin that has been forgiven. And thirdly, to purify our souls from excessive attachment to creatures, whether that's self-love or any other attachments which are imbalanced or inordinate, etc. Because nothing impure can enter into heaven. That's the book of Revelation. So basically, purgatory is like getting that metal bar with a bit of rust in it and putting it in the fire and getting it heated up and then building it with the hammer to get all the impurities out so that you can be made ready for heaven. If heaven is also depicted as a type of wedding feast, the wedding feast of the Lamb, well, this is where the bride and the bridegroom get prepared for the wedding feast. They get all dolled up and all the makeup and all the hair and etc. and all the fancy dress for the wedding feast. That's what purgatory is. So why are we not teaching it? Why are we scared of it? Why are we silent about it?
Okay, so with Catholic schools, like you said, so we have a range of teachers, they're all humans. Is there any way we can, like as a CEO, let like free speech, fine, they can have their own opinions, all these teachers, but they must in a Catholic school abide by the Catholic teaching?
Yes, of course, that is actually the official position.
So we actually need to enforce it. Like, for example, when the gay marriage came out, we had, being in all these Catholic schools, like, honestly, this is not over-exaggerating, about 70% of teachers were saying, yes, we made, and they were walking through the playground, and I was like, and it was only a few boys that were like, what is going on? And I was one of those teachers that supported them, but I was even scared.
And you felt threatened because
I felt scared, and then we have like a couple of gay teachers, and everyone's like, congratulating them. And this is in the Catholic school, and I just think it's fine. You're an adult. You can do whatever you want, but we shouldn't be promoting it. Like the Catholic, all I'm saying is that, is there any way we can limit people's private lives and what they think and what they do at schools?
Look, Claudia, officially we've got all those things in place, right? When you look at our, Archbishop's charter for schools, look at all our official RE accreditation, documentation, etc. We expect people to be faithful to church teaching and to teach church teaching only and to model it in their lives. It's all there in the documentation. So where's the breakdown? In the enforcement, because it's the leadership at the local level, that is principal APRECs, that ought to enforce this. This is the great crisis. One thing I slightly disagree with you is that none of this is all right. It's not all right for any teacher at all, at any time, to give their own private opinion over and above church teaching. Private opinion that contradicts church teaching is never all right. I know you weren't implying that, yet, but you weren't meaning that, but who's to catch these people out? Who's to make these people accountable? You probably felt more pressured and threatened in your employment because you were actually upholding God's marriage as against gay marriage, right? And you know that you're in the minority, and that there's this culture among the staff that this is all about human rights and equality, but nothing about morality. And that just goes to show about how triumphant the principles of the sexual revolution has been in the minds of people in general. The sexual revolution prepared the way for this by telling us that sexual sin is not sin at all. And if it is sin, it's not serious. Okay? Let's not get all hung up about personal sins that are done out of weakness, because we should be putting a priority with respect to public sins or structural sins that impact on society and the population in general. They look at this type of sin as a victimless crime. So we shouldn't be worried about it. Basically, it's apostasy. We're in an age of general apostasy. And in that case, and this is how I reconcile this in my own mind and try and get some understanding of all this, the faithful are in the minority. And in official structures, we're in a very distinct minority when it comes to schools or even universities. And that's why I've been very blessed to survive 30 years in Catholic education. It's miraculous that I survived 30 years in Catholic education in 4 different jobs, and all I got was a couple of warning letters. One I deserved, one I didn't deserve, but we won't go there. I just happened to be in places where I had the freedom, because if I taught what I taught at St Charles and other schools in the 90s, I would have been sacked within 3 days. Absolutely.
Robert, I have tried to teach RE your way. The kids want to learn it that way. It's the actual RE department
That's
that
right.
are like...
They're lying to themselves and saying to themselves that this is what the families want, this is what the parents want, this is what the students want, and if we're like this, Mrs. Murad, if we're like this, I don't know if that's your surname. What's your surname?
I'm happy with this.
Okay,
Murad.
if you're going to teach like this, sorry, you're going to scare families away. We're going to get complaints, blah blah blah, and so we're going to shut you down, and you won't be teaching religion again. And if you persist in this, well, your job, you'll be terminated from your employment. This is the enormous crisis we have. This is why, we have a very good Archbishop in Sydney who knows what is right and is hoping and trusting in his leaders to do what is right. I think we definitely have an Executive Director of Schools now who's on the right side of things. We have the Director of RE&E who are definitely on the right side of things. And the many people in our office team, the vast majority are on the right side of things. But what's happening out there throughout 152 schools, we can't monitor everything. And this is where the breakdown's happening. I'd run the risk of repeating myself. The only solution is for me to identify people and for the system and good people in the system to identify future leaders and raise them up.
I recommend something.
Yeah.
Why don't we pull in all these principals and all these APs and tell them what we expect and how they should be?
But they are told. You'd be surprised how often we do tell them. But how many meetings we have a year where we have gatherings of RECs, YMCs, family educators, APs, principals, system leaders, and this message is generally disseminated. It's not necessarily put down in black and white, hard line, you're going to do this or else. It's not put like that. But for most part, what I suspect is that people hear it, they think, okay, here it is, this is the party line. But when they go back to their schools or their offices, they just do what they're normally doing. Okay, that's the big issue, that's the big problem. And by the way, a point that you made, that the kids really want it this way, I agree with you.
Yeah.
They really do. See, I was very blessed. When I started at St Charles, the kids were only year 7 and 8. They weren't in year 11 and 12 and already hardened in their ways. If I was to go into a new school, I'll be saying, well, can you give me the year 7 and 8 classes? Because I know, and all the stats are showing it, both in Australia and around the world, that kids are falling off the cliff when it comes to their faith. They're making a decision against faith around the age of 13. We're seeing them at the age, we're measuring their faith and levels of faith practice, belief and practice in year 7, and then we're measuring it again in year 9, and we're seeing a marked collapse. Wow. So that's where I'd love to start teaching there to make sure that the kids aren't collapsing.
Could you please enlighten me as to your method of teaching, because I'm really out of the circle with this, like you've done.
My method of teaching is very basic and unscientific, and breaks every rule of pedagogy you can imagine. So they say don't be teacher-centered, I'm teacher-centered.
Yeah. We had once a religion lesson where Mr. Haddad gave us a reading from a saint's version of what hell was. Let me tell you, we did not sleep for a week. We did not sleep for it, but that's the truth. That is what hell is. And we can't tell the kids that this is what will happen at the end of days. But that's how we were taught. So, yeah, like...
It wasn't as...
What impact do you think that's having?
I think... Okay, so what I'm saying is, our Catholic schools are more about, let's hold hands, sing songs, and have, Jesus is all loving. But I'm trying, and every school I go to, this is what I think. Kids at the age of 16, 15, they want to be scared. They want someone to say this is right and this is wrong. they will grow.
They want guidance.
Yes, they want by the age of 2021, they want truth.
Not only that, they actually want an adult
To tell them,
to guide them.
Why do you think their appeal, like Islam, is appealing? Because it's so like you can't drink alcohol. It's almost like an alcoholic wants.
You see, we have an intellect that's made to know and understand truth. And this is what we have to satisfy in each individual. People are actually searching for a certainty, for something that's clear to guide them. Now, of course, we have other issues today called postmodernism, which is imbuing in young people the mentality that there is no truth. If there was, we can't discover it anyway because our senses and our intellect are unreliable. That's a growing problem. But in general, we're made to know and understand reality as it is and to make decisions about that in our lifestyle, yes.
So yeah, I have heard that before, saying that God has made us to want truth, right? How do you say that to someone who doesn't believe in God? Who doesn't believe? So how do we sit here and actually explain certain aspects of our faith when they don't believe in God? So I can simply say that we are made to understand between right and wrong. We are made to want to seek out the truth. And they can say, but who is God? Like, I don't believe.
I think it's a very broad question, and it's a question of growing importance, because more and more surveys are showing that an increasing percentage of the population, every census, every 5 years, in Australia, in the United States, in South America, in Europe, in Great Britain, it's telling us the same story. Each generation is becoming more agnostic and more atheist. So you're going to encounter atheists and agnostics as a general rule regularly from now on. Now, of course, an issue like this, you just can't give one single answer to one question and hey presto, okay, you've converted them. You need a sit-down conversation where it's actually a civil conversation. And civil conversations are not easy in this area because new atheism is gearing people with the mentality to actually ridicule, to mock, to scorn people of faith. Old atheism was more intellectual, more refined, more cultured, and more civil. And some of the more intellectual atheists are actually quite embarrassed and outraged about how the new atheists, and I'm talking about people like, Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett. Well, he's not that bad, Daniel Dennett, but Christopher Hitchens was very bad. He's dead now, so he's no longer an atheist. Sam Harris, these people and others, they go out of their way to mock and scorn and just pour bile upon the believer. But if you ever have a chance for some type of lengthy conversation, what I will do, and I'm not saying this is the only way, but what I will do is to be looking at first principles about the origins of the universe and show how science and religion actually are working in tandem. Because a big propaganda tool of atheism for the last couple of centuries is that religion is unreasonable and religion contradicts science. They're at loggerheads with each other. In actual fact, more and more science is telling us that there is a correlation between the basic data in Genesis when it comes to the origins of the universe and the origins of life and what science is telling us. I'll give you some examples. Because the scientists from the 1920s onwards began to realise that the steady state theory of Professor Fred Hoyle, that the universe was eternal and therefore was not created, always was, is and always will be the same, was actually false. And that the scientists that determined that the universe had a beginning, the universe is expanding, and when you measure that expansion and reverse it, it goes back to an original singularity, that the universe was once all in one singularity with a diameter of 1/1000th of a millimetre, and that's science telling us that singularity one day just expanded, and we call that, and the people who did not believe in this theory, like Fred Hoyle, mocked the theory and called it the so-called Big Bang. But the so-called Big Bang actually now is scientific fact, and it was discovered first by a Catholic priest named Father George Lemaitre from Belgium, and his findings were all verified by Einstein. Lemaitre looked at Einstein's theory of general relativity and the principles there, and then worked out that we actually have an expanding universe from a single point that goes back a certain number of billions of years. We know that now to be somewhere between 13.7 and 13.8 billion years. And Einstein looked at all this and ticked off on it. What these discoveries told us is that the universe had a beginning. So that correlates with Genesis. And then when you add a little bit of philosophy into the scientific mix here, well, there was a beginning. Why was there a beginning? And if there's a beginning, there must have been a cause of a beginning. All right. Then you can have a look at, for example, when you read Genesis, there wasn't light at the beginning. There was a formless void. The earth was a formless void. And then eventually there was light. Okay? And later on there was the sun. Where how do you get light before the sun? Well, that correlates with what we know about science too, because after the Big Bang, the scientists are telling us it was about a 300 million year period where there was no light. That's why we can't actually visualize what the universe was at the point of the original Big Bang, when the expansion began. We can go back about 13.4 billion years with our telescopes and our Hubble and all that, everything that we use to actually view the universe. We go back about 13.4, but there's about a 300 million year gap where we can't observe because there was no light. Light began to emerge with what was called the ionization process in the universe. And so there was a formless void, and then there was light. And our sun is only 4.5 billion years of age. Our solar system is only 4.5 billion. Who says that? The Pope? No. The Catholic Church? No. The Bible? No. Science says that. So that pattern actually corresponds with the basic data in Genesis. Void, so, nothingness, then you have creation, but it's a void, and then there was light, and then there was the sun. And then when we look at the Genesis 1 and we look at the order of creation, and we're not being literalists here, we're not being six-day creationists here. That is a basic that's a text that is written in simple terminology. Actually, it's a poetic rhythm for a very simple illiterate people back how many centuries BC. Okay, so you can't expect it to be a comprehensive scientific or astrophysical text, all right? But it's telling us that creation was unrolled from the simplest, from the lifeless, to the plants, to the animals, and then to the humans. And that's what evolution says too. It was life evolved in that same order, from the simple to the more complex. So there's a correspondence there. And then you just want to keep talking about, I'll keep in this conversation talking about first causes. What caused all this? Why was there a cause? Why was there a movement? Why did life begin? Why did more sophisticated life forms appear, over as time progressed? Why was there a Cambrian explosion? By the way, the Cambrian explosion at about 550 million years BC actually debunks Darwinianism, which says that through positive mutations over lengthy periods of time, you get a more advanced life form or new species emerging from a previous species. Well, you need enormous amounts of time for that to happen. But the Cambrian explosion saw enormous numbers of creatures suddenly appearing in the world, on Earth, within a short period of about 6 million years. And that's not enough time to suddenly get new life forms appearing when there were no predecessors beforehand, which evolved into those more sophisticated life forms. So why was there a sudden explosion about 550 million years ago? There has to be causes for this. And ultimately, if you've got enough time to explain it, there must have been a first cause that was uncaused. Because if you go back infinite number of causes, then you don't have a beginning. If you don't have a beginning, you can't have a present. Okay? Now that's been my approach.
You're very philosophical.
Yeah, it is. But we have to actually have a more sophisticated adult faith, because we're losing the battle, and our young people are losing their faith, losing their religion, because they've still got a primary school education as they come into secondary schools, and the secondary schools are not lifting them up to be able to meet the adult questions they're now being confronted with.
We mentioned truth seekers before.
Mm.
What's your understanding of societies like the Rosicrucian Society and the Gnosis Society, who offer some type of truth the truth
Well, this
seeking?
is all naturalism. This is people who are rationalists, and we've actually moved beyond rationalism, but let's give a definition to rationalism. This emerged from basically the Enlightenment period. Now, what we're living in now is actually a result of a process that has gone on for probably 700 to 800 years. Okay, we're in a revolutionary society, and this revolution goes back to the late Middle Ages. It just unrolls in different phases. But basically, with the first of the revolutions that broke down Christendom was the Renaissance, and then you had the Reformation, and then you had the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment was a real break because it was the revolution that rejected faith. Okay, I call it the Endarkenment, not the Enlightenment, because it's basically the key element of the Enlightenment is that we don't accept anything on faith anymore. We only believe in what we can see, what we can know through our senses and understand with our intellect, what we can actually observe and test. So anything on faith, we're not going to take on board. Okay, if you can't prove God, then I'm not going to believe in God. If you can't see God, if you can't see it and prove it, and you can't test it, I'm not going to believe in anything on faith. So that was all these movements you've just mentioned are outgrowths from this period of the Enlightenment. The moderates of the Enlightenment period were the deists, the people who founded the United States, like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. They believed in a God, but a God that was distant and remote and was not personal and didn't get involved in the world. Made the world, then turned his back on it, right? And they are the moderate side, because the more radical side of the Enlightenment was a rejection of a God and a rejection of faith in God and faith in resurrection, rejection of a Jesus who was a divine Son of God who did miracles and rose from the dead is fanciful. It's mythology. You can't prove it, and we're not going to believe it on faith. So that's the prevailing mentality of, say, that's the growing mentality that's through the late 18th century, 19th century, and certainly ascends into the 20th century, is now predominant in the 21st century. If we were all just rationalists, there might be some hope to reason with people. Okay? And philosophy would be relevant here as a tool to try and reason people into faith. Ultimately, faith is a gift from God. We're just tools in the hands of the Holy Spirit to help, open hearts and minds for the work of the Holy Spirit to convert. But we're now in what's a post-rational world, which is postmodernism. Modernism equates to rationalism, and postmodernism equates to post-rationalism. We don't believe in reason anymore. We've not only rejected faith, we're rejecting now reason. Now, I remember once when I was in chaplaincy in 2006, I was 42 years of age, and I came across a fellow who was 19, and my goodness, he's super intelligent. He was way above my, punching weight. I just felt so inadequate in conversation with this guy. He called himself an alethic postmodernist, and I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I only understood this year what an alethic postmodernist is. And I'll explain it to you in a minute. He said, look, we can't know anything for certain. Our senses and our intellect cannot know anything for certain. I mean, there's a contradiction just in that, He's certain that you can't know anything for certain. Okay. And I only realised this year that an alethic postmodernist is someone who believes that there is no truth. Aletheos in Greek is truth. And if you deny the existence of truth, and that we can't know truth, even if there was a truth, we don't know truth because our senses and our intellect are unreliable. Now, this is completely contrary to the philosophy and theology of St. Thomas Aquinas and the understanding of the human person and how the human person knows and understands. Right? It basically, sanity is Thomism. Thomism, St. Thomas Aquinas, is sanity. Anything that rejects St. Thomas Aquinas, and that's what the Enlightenment philosophers were principally doing. Hobbes and Hume and Locke and all these people dismantling Thomistic understanding of the human person, how we understand a view of the world, the universe, the purpose of life, etc. They are dismantling that and replacing it with their own philosophies. An ontic postmodernist is someone who believes that there's no reality, everything's an illusion. Ontic relates to ontology, which relates to being. And there are a small minority of people who are saying, actually, I want to tell you now that I really don't exist. I'm an illusion and you're an illusion. And what I'm saying is an illusion as well, and the whole world's an illusion. And if you're thinking, hey, that's insanity, you are right. This is the consequence of, when you break a branch off a tree, it's still green for a while, eventually it becomes dead wood. And we're at the place now of dead wood. And this is a scary place, because you know, what hope is there for humanity? We're going to go to despair. We're going to go to insanity. People are going to realise, hey, actually, I do have an intellect and I do have senses and I do think I know things and I can understand things and there must be a purpose in life, but they no longer are given a purpose in life. They're told that they no longer, there is no truth, there's no objective truth, there's no objective morality, there's no purpose, there's no meaning in life. The new atheists are pouring this on thick and hard. You are just a creation of forces beyond your control, chemical elements that have been arranged through chance processes over time. There's no design of God. There's no objective truth, morality, purpose or meaning in life. You construct it yourself. Okay? And where is that leading young people now? It's going to lead young people to despair, ultimate hopelessness. Yeah.
But then can you just counteract? Because I had this same conversation with someone at work today. But then I just said, I just want to ask you one question. So what is your purpose in life?
Yeah.
Because when this person was talking, it was almost like I'm just existing, then the next day there's none of me. You know, that's it. When I die, I die.
Yeah.
But I'm like, so then what's the purpose of your life? Why are you here for then? Have you ever thought about that? And they didn't respond to me at all.
But firstly, they don't have a response.
Okay. But is that maybe one way we can lead them to actually start thinking about what their purpose in life is?
You know, I think if you show that your life is happier than theirs, they might start asking some questions. You know, that you can just witness to them that, listen, I actually do believe in a God, and I do believe that I've been designed by God, and I have a body and a soul, and I have powers to know, understand, judge, this is not by mere chance. I can do spiritual things. My ability to know and understand and love are actually spiritual actions. They're not material actions. They're not, you know, love in the universe is not just a result of random combinations of different molecules. It's something that's real, but it's not tangible, it's not material. So there is a spiritual side to myself and the world. And I'm very happy because I have a purpose and I have meaning, and it's not something I can construct and deconstruct. It's subjective. It's real, and I know that. And you just show that you witness a happier life than theirs, and let God do the rest. If you don't have the intellectual arguments, that's okay. Very few do, and it's very hard for me to have this type of conversation in a short, sharp 5 minutes with someone who's angry and will get me angry. All right, you just witness your life, that you have meaning and purpose. And you never know how you could break through there. This guy that I met at uni, you know how I got him in the end? It was 3 years later. He was a good guy. This guy was good. This guy was a gentleman, and he was extremely intelligent, but well-behaved, well-mannered, and very respectful. And one day, it's 3 years later, it's 08, and I'm walking from Redfern Station towards Sydney Uni, the normal pathway, and there he is, he's getting out of the car. And he's in his graduation robes, you know? And he's got this old woman with him, coming out of the car with him. Now remember, this guy said that we cannot know anything for certain, and he reiterated that multiple times. Absolutely nothing, we cannot know anything, absolutely nothing for certain. Okay, that's your philosophy. Doesn't make sense to me. I didn't have the equipment to debate him. But at this moment, he got out of the car with this woman. I said, how's things going? What's happening? I'm graduating today. Congratulations. And I just pointed to the woman there, meaning like, who is she? And he said, well, that's my mum. She's coming for the graduation. That's my mum. And I whispered in his ear and I said, are you sure that's your mum? And you know what? He had this scary look on his face. Because I didn't have an intellectual argument to debunk him, but I just debunked him with common sense and reality. He knows that's his mum. He's pushing this philosophy. You could not know anything for certain. Absolutely nothing for certain. But deep in his heart, he knows that's his mum. So there goes his philosophy burning. There's the needle in the balloon that...
And graduation day, Robert.
Yeah, I did the man a favour, trust me. And I was nice at the same time. Come on, he knows that's his mum. And by the way, he also knows he's graduating as well. So, don't give me that you can't know anything for certain. When you see a red light, you stop. When you see a green light, you go. If you're Lebanese, you probably go no matter what the colour is. But it doesn't matter. Their philosophy is really, and I use this in a technical sense, is nonsense. It makes no sense. It is irrational. Postmodernism denies rationality. It is irrational. And faith is not irrational. Faith can have philosophical underpinnings. Okay, faith comes from revelation, but when we put it to the test, what we know from revelation is consistent with reason, if we're reasoning properly. Okay, what's next?
So just on that postmodernist point, the best-selling book last year was The 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, who basically just demolishes everything about it and just uses reason. And he came out here last year, and there's a huge following, particularly with young men, because they're thirsty for this truth and just for like common sense, like what you were saying. So is that sort of like, that seems to me like we're pushing back. Are things starting to turn, do you think? I think
that for Jordan Peterson is a great blessing, but it's a reactionary movement, meaning that it's a desperate pushback, but on a small scale. And I don't see it as a general full frontal pushback. I'm so glad there's a Jordan Peterson. Yeah. And I'm so glad because he can penetrate, because he's got the credentials, he's got the ability to speak, to articulate in public and confidently, and actually demolish the mockers in public. Remember him on Q&A last year when you had that woman from the ALP on the same panel, and he really put her in her place, and she looked way out of her depth. Now, we don't want to mock and humiliate people, but sometimes the mockers, they ask for it. They go out on a limb to mock, and then they realise that, hey, you're cutting the limb and you're sitting on it, okay? So, but we need more Jordan Petersons, but the point is here that Peterson gave people confidence to come out and say, hey, he's saying what I'm thinking. Thank goodness, because we are in a politically correct dictatorship where the media is always telling us how to think, what to believe, how to eat, how to sleep, how to live, how to have relationships. Everything. They're trying to dictate every aspect of our lives, and people, this is why we're getting this reaction where we get popularism and we're getting governments being elected, which aren't necessarily totally good governments, they're not. But people are desperate, they don't know where to turn politically. Trump has enormous problems and he really frustrates me and angers me at times. But why did people vote for someone who was so uncouth and such a disaster politically in his campaign? Because they were fed up with the politically correct dictatorship of the leftist side of politics and their media allies who just keep telling us, bombarding us how we should be. We're going to be told soon, stop eating meat, stop having children, and that the way to go is the ideal human is going to be the childless, vegan, gay lesbian.
I work with one of those.
And that's the ideal human that we should aspire to. Yeah.
Can I do the token aliens and Bible question?
Yeah.
So I came across something the other day about aliens and in the Bible, and then my friend sent me a Deuteronomy passage about the Anakites.
Amalekites. How do you spell it?
Anakites, Anakites. And the quote is, they say the people are stronger and taller than we are, the cities are large, the walls with walls up to the sky. And then there's the Nephilites.
Yeah. I'm familiar with this in general. Yeah, keep going.
The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. This is the New International Version. And in Genesis. So this kind of freaked me out a little bit because
Look, I have read commentary on that, and the best I can give is that they're not aliens, and they're not angels having intercourse with humans. They're just different races of humans, which are much stronger and violent and powerful. About aliens in general, there's nothing to prohibit belief in aliens. There's nothing at all to prohibit belief in life on other planets, whether they be vegetative or sensitive, that is plants or animals. Nothing at all. If they found life on other planets, so good, fantastic. It's like when the Portuguese and the Spanish discovered the New World, the Americas. They found new human civilizations and new plant forms and new animal forms, same when they came to Australia. No big deal. Okay? The issue is there intelligent life on other planets? Possibly. Why not? There's no moral or theological reason why not. Do I personally believe that they'll ever discover life in any form on other planets? Personally, I don't believe they will. But I'm open to being proven wrong. I think they're too far away for us to ever visit them to know for sure. And we know for sure in the solar system there is no other life except on Earth. Now, are we being visited by aliens? I don't believe so. I think it's, in my most extreme thinking, I'm thinking this is all a hoax and perhaps even a conspiracy. But is it possible to be visited by aliens? Yes, sure. Now, once I read something from a Jesuit priest, a Jesuit who was also a Catholic, and he said that if there are intelligent life on other planets visiting us, well, if they are without sin, and they could be because they're not connected to the human family, they wouldn't want to know us.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And if they are with sin, and because they're more technologically advanced than us, we wouldn't want to know them. So that's how he concluded. That's a reasonable conclusion with a bit of humour. But there's nothing. You never go around telling people, my faith says there can't be life on other planets and there can't be intelligent life on other planets. Our faith has never said anything with respect to that. It's not a moral or theological question. It's purely natural. It's purely scientific. So.
Can I ask? I don't know if this is okay. On the 31st of October, it's Halloween, right?
It's my wedding anniversary.
I know it's your wedding anniversary too. I'm never comfortable with Halloween at all. I just don't like how it's done. I don't like spooky things, and I don't like how little kids are meant to dress up as. Anyway, is it wrong to have your kids involved in it? Or, because I got to feel like my kids are older, they're fine, they really don't care, right? But I just feel that in a few years' time, God willing, when they have their own kids and everything, it's going to be rampant. So
yes, and it's growing. And
it's growing every year.
I see more and more houses in Leichhardt, which is the most atheist part of Australia, already decked out with spider webs and ugly
there's a massive street
macabre
in
figures.
Belfield, so you don't have to go all the way to Leichhardt.
Yeah.
Plus, there is one house in Punchbowl. What is
Punchbowl.
that? What is that? Jerry, what is that?
Yeah, which goes to show how weak-minded we've become in this country, that we have to imitate everything America does.
That's right, that's my...
Look,
But-
yes,
but
keep going.
So, is it wrong for our kids to actually participate in it? Or do we just do it just so they can just, like, we don't make a big deal out of it and just, whatever?
This is what I do. My kids are also, for the most part, too old, they don't care. I this is another good thing that's been completely distorted. Because Halloween derives from All Hallows Eve. It's the day before All Saints' Day, and it was All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day on the 2nd of November were really important days in the church, and we prepared beforehand with this celebration on the 31st of November. So it's another good thing that's been distorted, perverted, and made ugly. This is my starting position, is that I'll teach my kids that the way it's expressed now is macabre and ugly, and it's got nothing to do with Christianity. And that's not what we're going to do. We have our feast days, and this is how we celebrate. Now, when Tim Staples was here just the other week, we got onto this topic, and he said the way with my kids, because his kids are actually very young still, with his kids, he said, with my kids, I get them to dress up as saints, and they go door knocking, trick and treating. Okay, he said that, and I don't have a problem with that. Because you're not indulging in the macabre side, the ugly side. We've desensitized young people into accepting and normalizing the ugly and the macabre, even the satanic. I think that's been a deliberate process, and it's been done through popular entertainment, through music or movies or whatever over time. I'm not comfortable with my kids going from door to door knocking on people's homes anyway, even from that natural point of perspective, just from the safety perspective. I don't want my kids knocking on strangers' doors.
I know, like, we can still hold that opinion, but I reckon in 10 years' time, it's going to be every house participating and every family participating.
Well, we'll wait and see, but I think you've got to get in early with your kids and understand that, help them to understand who we are, why we do this, why we don't do that. Give them the reasonable underpinnings for it. You know, this is ugly, skeletons and spiders and spider webs and, witches. That's against our faith. And people probably say, oh, you're overreacting, Robert, it's only kids having a bit of fun. Well, we'll let them be kids, have a bit of fun in a better way, in a way that's more consistent with our faith and beauty. Don't ever decorate your house with this ugliness for a start. So that's my position on it.
Thanks, Robert.
At the moment, like, the Catholic Church has a very bad rap, with all that's going on. Do you think it'll recover? And what do you think,
The very bad rap is our fault. We're self-inflicted wounds, massively self-inflicted wounds, enormous scandals. It's not just the child sexual abuse scandal, which is terrible, large scale, horrific, consistent across most of the Catholic world. There are some parts of the world where it's very, very minimal or virtually non-existent, like Africa and the Middle East. So for some mysterious reason, which I can't actually give reasons for, it's more of an Anglo-white, European, Western phenomenon, more so percentage-wise than in the other parts of the church. There's that, but there are other scandals as well, whether they're, between consenting adults or male and female, or abuse with monies and other corruptions in the church. It's enormous, and it's very disheartening. Sometimes it's demoralizing, and the big problem is scandal. Scandal means it gives bad example to unbelievers who then see the Catholic Church in this evil, terrible light, and they want to have nothing to do with it. Or causes people to lose their faith, abandon their faith as a consequence. So one of my first cousins told me a couple of months ago at a funeral, I used to go to St. Jerome's, and, we had Father X and Father Y, and they're both now, we know they're pedophiles. I've lost my faith, I don't believe anymore. Now, I can't lose my faith that way, but many ordinary people have. Will it recover? Well, the church belongs to Christ ultimately, and he triumphs over all human failings. From a human perspective, it's very difficult for us to recover, but for a start, for those who love God, love Christ, love the church, and want to see things in the right way, then your solution is to do the right thing where you are, who you are. It's very easy to look to your left and to your right and to see all these terrible things happening, and to get a sense of despair and despondency. and feel like, it's all hopeless, what on earth is going on. The way to get sanity and peace of mind, and the way to help rebuild and to recover, is for you to do what you're called to do. So what are you called to do? You're a wife, you're a mother, you're an educator, and do them well. And so you as member of the church, you as church, a member of the church, you're that part of the church which is doing the right thing. And it goes for every one of us, where we are to do the right thing. Yeah.
What strategies or tips would you give somebody who is learning to develop their faith? Practical strategies to strengthen their relationship with Jesus and with Mary?
Well, obviously, if they want to do that, it's because they've already responded to God's grace. For someone to say, listen, I want to learn more, I want to practice more, I want to be more, wow, that's a great breakthrough. And that didn't come from them. That's God working on them, either directly or through another person, an event, a person, whatever. And to be in that place is very good. I would advise that person to follow their heart in how they will develop that faith and how it would manifest in their prayer, their devotions, their practices, and how they get involved with the church. So I remember in my own faith life, which is in my very active faith life since my early 20s, so about 33 years, one mistake I made was in a period in my life where I was following what other people loved. I got caught up in certain groups or movements, and what their interests were, I said, I'll make them my interests, when they really weren't my interests. And I realised after a couple of years that's led me to a certain level of unhappiness and a dead end and a temporary collapse. Okay, so you have to find out from God in your own prayer life, what does He want me to do and how do I get there? So starting with your own prayers, don't pile up a huge number of prayers because X is praying this and I should pray that as well. No, you pray at a level that's comfortable for you and your call and your vocation, your state in life. You might be very busy wife and mother with young kids and working. I'll start praying 15 decades each day. And I'll say this and I'll do this and I'll go to daily mass and I'll do my holy hour as well every day. Yeah, that's not going to work. All right, you're going to ruin yourself and you end up going to collapse. And you give up on faith and prayer altogether. So you must be comfortable with the level of prayer and the type of prayers and devotions you're adopting that appeal to you personally. Same with your spiritual reading. What are you going to read? You're going to read something that you feel is going to be spiritually beneficial for you. So you're not going to buy as your first book, St. Thomas Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics, right? That's a good devotional thing. I think I'll start with that and talk to your 6-year-old about how Aristotle got it all wrong when it came to final cause and first causes. You're madness. That's madness, okay? That's a certain type of reading for a certain type of Catholic up there, right? So you pick, you pray, you read, you do what appeals to your heart. So how am I going to be active in the church? Should I be involved in parish life and how? Maybe I just help clean in the church Saturday mornings. Maybe I'll help teaching for the SAN or the youth group on the weekend, or be involved in this youth group or adult group on a weeknight. Or maybe I'll get involved with St. Vincent de Paul or Catholic Mission or, whatever. Or maybe I'm really young and I'll be a teacher. I want to be a great Catholic teacher. Or I want to be a great Catholic nurse or great Catholic doctor. Or I want to be a lawyer and I'll work for the church or with the church. You have to discern that in prayer with God, and He talks to you in your heart where you will go, how you will serve in that way. And don't look at other people and say, well, I'll do what that person's doing, because that's not necessarily what God wants you to do.
Are you comfortable to share what those movements were that you got caught up in?
Yeah, I was, in the early 90s, I was involved, well, basically, from the mid-80s, I was involved in Catholic groups which were very traditionalist,
Okay.
right? And they were very hardcore, and they were old Mass, Latin Mass, and exclusively so. And their influence on me is still prevalent in certain ways. But the group that I was with for quite a long time had me worried because I felt some of their positions were too extreme. And some of their attitudes about themselves and others was very pharisaical. So I wanted to generally, slowly move away from that group and find a similar group which didn't have those problems, which I thought I did in the early 90s. But the group I moved to was very involved in liturgy and, you know, old Mass and putting on solemn and sung Masses, and that was all very, very good, very attractive. And I thought, well, that's where I'll go. You know, I'll be involved in the choir and I'll be involved in this old Latin Mass movement, and then they began to get me interested in their plans to be a Benedictine monk and to go to France and to some of these great monasteries there called Fontainebleau and Beroux, lovely, fantastic. And I'll go with them and join them, and then we'll come back to Australia and we'll set up a Benedictine house in Australia. Well, I got caught up in that out of my own naivety and really desperation just to be involved in something. And after a couple of years, that fell into a complete heap. That collapsed totally. And I think God, in hindsight, I'm pretty sure God allowed that to collapse, because God would say, look, Robert, they're not bad things, but that's not for you. That's not what I want you to do. You're just imitating other people, following their interests. And I want you to be an educator. I called you out of law, and I want you to be an educator, and you're going to stay in education. So all these plans that you're building up, I'm just going to let them collapse. Now, it was a pretty traumatic time in my life, in the mid-90s, off work for a while. It took me about 18 months to recover. Even though I was back at work in about 6 weeks, it took me about 18 months to recover, to feel stabilised again. And I'm pretty sure that the right thing was to stay in education, which is what appealed to me in the first place. When I went into education, it was because my heart was lit. I was on fire for it, and it wasn't because someone else influenced me or I'm following someone else's interest. I just happened to be slowly prepared by God when I'm finally finished my law degree and I'm working for Westpac Banking Corporation Legal Division, and it was as boring as. And I began to think, hold on, this is not really what I'm meant to do for the rest of my life. I know it. And the moment, a critical moment for me, which I've related this story many times, was that I'm on a floor, it's 228 Pitt Street, level 6, and there's a barrister and 2 other solicitors, and gosh, it was so boring. I used to work on level 5 with the guys. It was a lot of fun, you know. All the illegal instruments that we had, conveyancing, certificates of title, transfer deeds, titles. That was a lot of fun, you know. And I'm upstairs now in the most boring legal world you can imagine. And the barrister gave me a file which was that thick. And it was Little Old Lady versus Westpac Banking Corporation. And the barrister said to me, Robert, look, have a look at this file. Actually, we want to settle out of court, study it, and let's make the woman an offer. Settle out of court. So I was going through the file, and there was 2 things happening within me. One, I really didn't know what I was doing. And secondly, as I was reading each piece of correspondence, each document, the thought came to my mind is that, hey, I'm on the woman's side. I feel sorry for her, but I'm paid to represent Westpac Banking Corporation. So when the barrister came back to me a couple of hours later, he said, well, Robert, what do you think? And I said, well, let's offer her 80,000. And he said, Robert, we don't normally start that high, which was a very polite way. He was a gentleman, and he basically a very polite way of saying, look, Robert, you don't know what you're talking about, and whose side are you on anyway? Like 80,000, and get real. In my heart at that moment, I said, I'm not giving my life to the kingdom of Westpac. I don't know what it is, but it's not Westpac. Now, I had other issues in my life at the time, and I went to confession in the same week to a priest in the cathedral, and he shook me up really bad. it was an issue that I had. He gave me an answer which was the right answer, but I wasn't ready for the right answer. So I just went back to the office at the end of lunch. I told the barrister, look, I'm not feeling well. I want to go home. And he said, okay, no problem. So I went home and I was off work for 3 days. And during that 3 days, I went to visit St. Charles. And I saw Father Dalmy in the monastery, because he was the deist at the time. He was the head of the monastery at the time. And I was sitting with him just to have a chat with the issue I spoke about with the other priest in the confessional. And then I got onto the issue. I said, look, Father, I finished my law degree, but I really don't want to stay in law anymore. Do you have anything for me to do here? And he offered me the job in the school. But beforehand, what was happening to me as well, very complex time in my life, is that I began to actually think about teaching before I asked that question. I began to lie in bed thinking, it'd be great if I was a teacher. I'd love to teach. Just the idea of teaching, being in front of the kids, teaching what I love. I thought, well, I can't be a teacher. I'm not qualified to be a teacher. How can I be a teacher? I'm a lawyer. I've got a law degree. I don't have a teaching degree. So how's that going to happen? I thought, well, I'll be a law teacher, but I've only got a bachelor's degree, and I can teach law at TAFE at least. There must be some TAFE that teaches law. They didn't have legal studies in schools at the time, and so and then later on I thought, well, teaching would be great. I'll get all these holidays. Well, there I was deceived about that. That's for sure. But that was God. I realised in hindsight how God was preparing me for me to do what he wanted, and giving me these gentle, subtle suggestions. Firstly, emptying my heart of Westpac and law and trying to fill it with ideas about teaching. And when I was sick for those 3 days, that was part of his plan. I didn't see it at the time. I didn't hear voices, I didn't have visions, I didn't have visitations from angels, I had no skywriting. But I just, in these through the ordinary, he moved me down to that monastery, asked that question, and he offered me that job. And then he arranged, that was on the 25th of August, thereabouts, and a couple of days later I had an interview with Father George Suttard, who was the principal there at the school at the time, catechesis 7. And he met with me. He said, okay, Robert, Father Tom has spoken to me about you. He's told me about the situation. I'm very happy to have you in the school. I know you've got a law degree. That's important. That'll inspire the kids to study. That's exactly what he said. And here's your contract. You're going to start teaching next year 7 and 8 history, religion and geography. And I want you to do a dip ed. You want me to start teaching straight away? I said, yes, why not? Okay. And so I took the paper, signed the contract, that was it. I was employed, and I had 5 months before I started. Then the funny thing, August 29, again a few days later, I was asked to come down for an interview with the executive. There was Norma Bouhabib there on the...
she was my youth.
Norma Bouhabib, actually I met a couple of weeks ago, and I had a chat and reminded her about this interview. Now there I am, I'm with Father George, I'm with Victor Sahadi, I'm with Norma Bouhabib, and it's 6 o'clock in the evening on the 29th of August, 89. And I'm there, I've already got the job, I've got my contract signed, all good. And Norma started asking me questions, because no one told Norma that. She thought it was just another interview of someone who wants to be a teacher at St. Charles. She wasn't told that I already had a job. And Norma says, okay, Robert, tell me about yourself. What's your teaching qualifications? I said, none. What's your teaching experience? I said, none. And she said, and you want to be a teacher? And then Father George just said, oh, sorry, Norma, I didn't tell you. Robert's not here for an interview. He's already got the job. I'm just introducing him to the executive. And then for the next 15 minutes, I began to give my just outstanding spiel about my philosophy of religious education as a 25-year-old, how it should be. One person who was impressed by what I said was Victor Sahadi, because he was old style and he's thinking, well, this is what we need, And 5 months I had to wait at Westpac, and I resigned from legal division, and I said, let me go back down to legal services, back with the guys, back with where the fun was, and I worked there for the next 5 months, and then around mid-January, I had my last day, and then I had a 2-week break before I started at St. Charles, which was for the 1st of February, 1990. And during that time, I got a phone call. Now, of course, being St. Charles, there's a coup d'etat, and the principal was overthrown, and a new principal was put in place.
I don't know what you're talking about.
And it was Father Aziz Aziz, and Father Aziz was obviously studying who his teachers are, doing the right thing, and he came across my file, and it only had one document, 4 pages, and only the front page was filled. Name, address, age, phone number, LLB. Then pages 2, 3 and 4 were completely blank. Anyway, he called me down for a meeting, and then I thought, okay, that's all right, the principal wants to meet with me, no problem. So I arrived, and I'm waiting there in the driveway, and he sees me and says, oh, it's you. I recognise you because I'm hard to miss in the church, right? And come, let's have a chat. Anyway, I'm sitting in his office opposite the desk, opposite him at his desk. He gets my file and he says, there's nothing here. How did Father George hire you? We have inspections. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? I have a job, don't I? You know, that's what I'm thinking. And I can't remember exactly what happened next, but then I began to give him my same spiel about education. At the end of it, he said, look, I think you're going to be one of my best teachers. That's what he said. What I didn't know at the time is that he put me on 5 weeks probation. And if I was to flop, he was going to sack me after 5 weeks. So he asked a fella named Ellie to just hover around my classes. And I remember seeing Ellie, and Ellie used to stand in my class, and I remember teaching 8 white history on the Crusades. And there's Ellie standing at the back watching my lesson. And I didn't have any suspicions about it. I just thought, okay, you're welcome, Ellie. Here, listen to my class. You know? And anyway, after 5 weeks, I got a phone call to come down on the Saturday to see Father Aziz. I said, okay, I'll come down. By the way, I was beginning to get traction. I was feeling good, doing 70-hour weeks. It was hard work, but I was loving it. I was loving it.
And we were loving it too, right?
And thank you. And Father Aziz said, Robert, look, this is after 5 weeks. Remember, he's going to sack me after 5 weeks. He said, look, I just have to tell you that I had to sack Jane yesterday. Because I said, why? She was the person assisting the principal, the de facto AP in the secondary school. I said, why? What happened? She tried to overwhelm me. Now, I remember seeing her and some others just in the corridors talking, and I thought, I'm not interested, that's not me, I'm not going to get involved in that until much later. But anyway. And he said, I want you to take her place. And I was horrified. I said, no way, Father, not me. I can't do it. I'm already overworked. I'm really doing 70-hour weeks. You can't do this to me. He said, I want you to do it. I want you to take her place. I said, no, give it to Pierre. Give it to Sammy. Give it to Jamal. Give it to these other people. I don't want it. I was afraid. I'm still getting traction. These teachers were much older than me. It was, what's going on here? And after a few more minutes of I think I knocked him back 3 times. And he said, do you believe in St. Charbel? I said, yes. Go pray to him and go. On Monday, you're AP. That's it. So he kicked me out of the office. Well, it was a de facto AP. Yeah, it was. In welfare.
Okay.
Not in curriculum, just welfare. Yeah. Right. Rather than being sacked, I got this, and I was stunned, And I remember the first day, Monday, week 6, 1990, I'm standing there at the photocopy machine. And there's this primary teacher there. I forget her name, but she was very friendly with me, and she's teaching. She taught Arabic, and she had no hostility towards me generally. But she just looked at me, and she looked up at me, and she said, "What a joke! What a joke about my appointment." And I stood there thinking, and I said absolutely nothing. Now, for Joanne knows, for me to say nothing is miraculous. But I said nothing because she was right. It was a joke. I'm AP after 5 weeks with no teaching qualifications or experience. I'm 25 years of age, trying to boss around teachers who are twice my age. It's just, how on earth was this going to happen? It was all the hand of God. And you don't see it at the time, but it was. Same with my illness in 1994. Everything was just the hand of God, how he was leading me in a path. I'm no one special. That's how he led me, but he's doing the same with everyone else in the world. How he leads them to the path that he wants them to follow. And this is the way we help rebuild the church. You just do what you're called to do. and leave everything, blank everything else out.
Amen.
Amen.
All right?